Hi, in this video we'll be going over the continuation of the C# tutorials. So in this video we'll be going over introduction to list boxes. So list boxes display a list of items and allow the user to select an item from the list. So let's just start with some notes. So we'll just have a comment down here. So list boxes. List boxes display a list of items and allow the user to select an item from the list. So a list box displays a list of items and allows the user to select one or more items from the list. In Visual C#, use the list box control to create a list box on an app's form. So it's a control. So we'll do an example in a sec here. So the list box does not. So a list box that we're going to show. Basically, if you have more than a certain amount of items, you're going to see a scroll bar, which we haven't talked about. So scroll bars are just like this thing on the side here. You can scroll down the page or across the page, right? In this case, we can't really go across the page. Kind of, not really. And we can go up and down. So left and right, up and down, those are scroll bars. Okay, so we have basically list box. List example. Okay, so we'll just talk about it a bit more. So list box control is found in the common control section of the toolbox. So we know where that is. So this is if you're just dragging and dropping it. This is the way the Canadian curriculum teaches it. They want you to use a drag and drop first. I think they kind of teach it too much, to be honest. Because like when I learned Android and Java, we weren't using the list box. We weren't using the drag and drop too much. They just kind of mentioned it. We got right into coding the objects right away. So hopefully we can move on to that soon. I guess that's just the way that the curriculum teaches that, but maybe Microsoft wanted to do that. Anyway, so what we'll have to do here is just find it in the common controls. That's just right here, I think. Nope. There we go. Sorry, it's the bottom tab there. Systems.windows.forms, list box. Right there. Oops, sorry, I think I just hit the mic by accident. My hand gets caught on it once in a while. Okay, so there's an items property, so let's just talk about that as well. Writer's glitching out has stopped the use of my keyboard. Okay, it works now. So the list box. So the list box has an items property. So basically items, we'll talk about that here in a sec. But basically the items that you add to your list box then you're also adding them to your list box's items property. To store values in the items property at design time, follow these steps. So select the list box control in the designer window. So this is just like something like that. In the properties window, select the setting for the items property. It might be displayed as collection, it says, so let's just try to look for that here. Yeah, here we go. So we have items and then collection. There's an ellipsis. Okay, so it's in the items property and beside is collection, so I think that's wrong here. Why can't I click that? Okay. Enter the strings in the collection, 1 per line. Okay, so I guess you just type something and hit OK. So the ellipsis button appears. Click the ellipsis button, which we did. The string collection editor dialog box appears. String collection editor dialog box. Okay. Type the values that are to appear in the list box in the string collection editor dialog box. So let's just type a few strings here, one at a time, and then hit OK. So let's just go with some fruits here, something like apples. Hit OK. Okay, looks like we don't have a kind of a full list box here, but we'll just go with that. Didn't that work? One per line. Okay, so we'll just go with oranges. Okay. Plums. Let's go with auto size. Is there an auto size? I don't see one, so let's just go with the font size to be about 36 or something. Can we just go with a few more here? Some other fruits. Mangoes. Cocoa nuts. Then we'll go with maybe some other ones, cherries or something. I'm just trying to get to the end of this box here. I might just have to make it just smaller. Oh, let's just try making it smaller, see what happens here. There we go, now we got something. Okay. So if we go with a few more. So the way the list box works is that you have to have the text big enough to fit outside the box, and the scroll bar appears automatically. Okay, so I'm going to get the list box bounding box up. I'll just add a few more strings here. What other fruits? Blueberries. blackberries. Okay, that should be enough. So we just hit the OK button after that. So once we learn C# a bit more, perhaps later on we'll be able to fill list boxes from external data sources such as databases. If you really needed to use a list box, I'm not sure when you would actually use one. Okay, there's something called the selected items property. That's important as well. So the selected item property when the user selects an item in a list box, the item is stored in the list box's selected item property as well. Actually, so this is when something is selected, so let's just note that down. So when the user selects an item in a list box, the item is stored in the list box's selected items property, or selected item property. In the list box's selected item property. So for example, suppose an application has a list box control named fruit list box. So fruit list box, kind of like what we had, we didn't really name it. We'd go back and call this fruit list box. So now the identifier is fruit list box. And a string variable named selected fruit, so we could have a selected fruit variable. Perhaps some kind of private global maybe, or private field. So the fruit list box control contains the items apples, pears, bananas, for example, whatever. If the user has selected pears, so the statement here assigns a string pears to the variable selected fruit. So let's just code that as an example here. Writer keeps canceling the keyboard out. Okay, so we go selected. So let's just go with selected fruit points to fruit list box. So we reference our list box. Dot selected item dot toString. So you have to call the toString method as well. So determining whether an item is selected. An exception will occur if you try to get the value of a list box's selected item property when no item is selected in the list box. For that reason, you should always make sure that an item is selected before reading the selected item property. You can do this with the selected index property. So we'll just note that down here, another one. Selected index property. Selected index property. So the items that are stored in a list box each have an index, or probably I'd assume it's just going 0 to whatever it is. Starting at the top is 0, all the way down is to whatever number, 0 to n. I'm just assuming that. Let me just double check that here. So the index is simply a number that identifies the item's position in the list box. So we know that. We don't really need to talk about that too much. It's like an array. I don't think we've done arrays yet. It's like a string index. I don't think we've actually talked about that either. Do we talk about that? I can't. I think I discussed it. We didn't really do any actual notes yet on it. We'll just talk about it then. So the index is a number that identifies did I spell that wrong? Can't spell identifies today. Okay, so that identifies so index is a number that identifies, why was it wrong? Whoops, I spelled that wrong. No. That's odd. Don't laugh. Okay, we'll just go with that. So index is a number that identifies, hold on here. IDENTIFIES, isn't that what I said the first time? That should be correct. Whoops, my bad. That's why that's wrong, I think. Okay, apologize for that. So index is a number that identifies the items. Sorry, I just woke up here recently. Okay, so the item's position in the list box. Index. So an index is a number that identifies the item's position in a list box. Starting at 0, not 1. Remember that. It should be the same for everything. Strings, arrays. Any index usually starts at 0. So it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, and then so on. The last index is n-1, so that's an important thing to remember, where n is the number of items. So can n be 0 or so if the last item is n-1, in this case n would be, you'd start at 1. You take the full amount of items. So if you have 10 items in a list box, you'd say, okay, well then I'm going to take the number of 10 because there's 10 items in the list box, not 9. So then I'll go n-1, which is 9. Therefore the last index would be 9 because 0 to 9 would be 10 elements. So just be careful with that. You will get tested on that at some point. Might not be in this language. If you're taking it in a university curriculum, they might test you on that earlier on, and whether you're learning like Java or C first or whatever. Some schools do Python first. Not that many. I think most schools do C or Java, at least in Canada, to start. Even in the States we learn C first, so something like that. But it may be changing now, they may be going for other things. I know in Europe they're pretty big on Python, like in the Netherlands, I guess that's where it was developed. They seem to be, I have one friend, like a trader coder friend, he's like a Python developer from the Netherlands, and he only knows Python. And yeah, so in some countries, in like for example in Europe, they only learn like Python and stuff like that. But you may see this, if that's you, you may see this question somewhere at some point in some index question. They usually try to trick you with deciding whether that n should be 0 or 1. So the answer should be 1. If they say where n is a number of items, then n is going to be 1, because n is the total amount, not 0. So just a trick question. So when the user selects an item in a list box, the item's index is stored in the list box's selected index property. So let's just note that down here as well. When the user selects an item in a list box, the item's index is stored in the list box's selected index property. Oops, selected index property. So when the user selects an item in a list box, the item's index is stored in the list box's selected index property. So for example, if we just click one of these indexes here, let's just say we click on apples, that means 0 would get stored in the selected index property. So this is important as well. So if let's go with some stars here because it's important. If no item is selected in the list box, the selected index property is set to -1. So if no item is selected in the list box, the selected index property is set to -1. So that's, let's say the bounding box is up now. Let's say the bounding box is not up, so let's just say it's running, you haven't clicked this list box at all. That means the selected index property will be -1. Let's just see what we have here. So we have a lab coming up, which will have list boxes in it. We'll be doing that later on in the next video. Video is getting long here as it is, so let's just go with this first, this last coding example here. So you can use the selected index property to make sure that an item is selected in a list box before you try to get the value of the selected item property. So you can use the selected index property to make sure that an item is selected in a list box. So let's just note this down. So you can use the selected index property. You can use the selected index property to make sure that an item is selected in a list box. Before you try to get the value of the selected item property. So you can use the selected index property to make sure that an item is selected in the list box before you try to get the value of the selected item property. You can simply make sure that the selected item property is not set to -1. You can check if the selected index property is not set to -1 before trying to read the selected item property. So we'll just do an example here. So if fruit list box dot selected item does not equal -1, we'll say selected fruit points to fruit list box dot selected item dot toString. So this is a little bit tricky, we haven't done this yet. So we're joining two methods together. You can do this, especially in Java, so you can say, okay, well, selected fruit points to the fruit list box dot selected item, and then we will also want to cast that to a toString. You could have said, okay, selected fruit points to fruit list dot selected item. Actually, no, I think you actually have to do this in one. Yeah, I think you have to do it in one method call. The docs that I have here don't really explain it, so you kind of just have to pick this up on your own. When you're working with properties and stuff, especially in JavaFX, you do this a lot too. You have to have a variable here pointed to, for example, your fruit list box. Call it selected item property, and say that you want to cast that selected item property to a toString, so you're really getting what's at the index here at the selected item. So let's say you're trying to get apples. Well, we know that's going to be index 0. So selected fruit points to fruit list box. So the fruit list box. So dot selected item dot toString. So this is getting whatever the item is selected by the user. So we'll do an example of this. It's kind of confusing because remember it's user driven, so the user has to actually click something. So once they click something, if the fruit list box dot selected item does not equal to -1, which means something is selected, then the selected fruit, which is an empty variable right now, points to, because right now selected fruit is not pointing to anything, then we're going to say, okay, well, we're going to point it to, in that case, fruit list box. We're going to reference our list box dot selected item, so the item that's being selected now, which is the index basically, dot toString. So then we're going to, so basically fruit list box dot 0 dot toString. You might be able to call 0 and 1 and numbers as well, so just check that. Test that if you can just call indexes, but you can just use this as well. So you can just play around with it. So that's pretty much it. Probably the most complicated thing we've done so far with this. I forget what they call this. We just keep having method calls on a method call. We could have had another method call here. So basically you just continue to use the dot operator, at the end of the next method. So fruitlessbox.selectedItem, which would be one method call, like a normal method call. Then if you want to continue to join method calls, and you just say, okay, we want this. You want to put a dot operator on the end of that to call another method, which will convert all this to a string. So hopefully that makes sense. Actually, this is a property, so yeah, you could do that with properties. You can do that pretty much with method calls too. Even in normal coding, without GUIs, you can do that. I do that a lot in data structures. If you're interested in more of that, I have some really long ones in my data structures video, sometimes having like maybe even up to 10 different methods. Excuse me, 10 different method calls in one line with this kind of joining of the dot operator. So if you're interested in more complicated method calls, check out my Java data structure series, because this is very similar to Java as it is. So I'll probably just end it there. Thanks for watching, guys. If you guys liked the video, you can like and subscribe to the channel to support the channel for more programming and investing tutorials. I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.